So what's going on, guys? My name's Chopper, and welcome everybody to a brand new video. And as you might be able to tell, I am not currently recording this from my usual setup. I'm actually at TwitchCon right now, recording this video from my hotel room, but that's not going to stop me. And which, by the way, if any of you guys are at TwitchCon, and if you see me, feel free to come up and say hello. But today, guys, we're going to be going over the 15 mistakes that I see players making that are preventing them from winning. Things that you can figure out what you're doing wrong, and if you correct those things, you should start playing much better and also start winning a lot more as well. Now, if you guys end up enjoying today's video, then despite the scuff setup, I would really appreciate if you guys could drop a like rating on the video. And of course, if you are brand new around here, make sure to go ahead and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Make sure to follow me on Twitch, where I'm actually going to be streaming, not today because I'm at TwitchCon, but as soon as I get back home, every single day. Link will be down below in the description. But with all of that being said and out of the way, guys, let's get into the 15 mistakes that you can work on correcting in PUBG. Number 15, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be not optimizing your settings. And now I'm saying not optimizing instead of having the best because I don't believe there are objectively what you would call best settings. Although what I can do is make a video about optimizing your settings for PUBG depending on what your platform is. So I can make one for all of those. If you guys want to see a full video of what are the most optimized PUBG settings, then let me know by dropping a like rating. But what I will say about settings, aside from it being extremely complicated to get right, especially for your particular setup, is the fact that a lot of people, based on what they're running, don't have their optimized settings. Either they simply copy and paste the settings of someone else and just lift that right off and use it on their own. However, it's not sort of built for their own hardware and stuff like that, so that can cause issues. What you need to do is be smart about your settings and figure out what works for you, what works for your equipment, and why. And again, as I said, I am more than happy to make a video discussing settings and helping you guys figure out what is the best for you particularly. But if you want to see that, just let me know by dropping a thumbs up on the video. Number 14 is going to be players who are attempting to use the zeroing mechanic with scopes with their sniper rifles, but are sort of failing at it because either they don't understand how it works or it's kind of unnecessary as a feature. If you don't know what zeroing is, this is a mechanic with some of the higher powered scopes in which you can determine the distance of an enemy and then zero your scope in order to hit the middle point on your scope. Instead of having to overcompensate and aim even higher upwards, let's say you see an enemy at 300 meters exactly, you zero the scope for 300 meters, and instead of having to aim upwards, you just aim with the middle point and it's going to hit that entirely. Now, some players try to use this when they're using the higher powered scopes, but to be honest, I don't think a lot of players are necessarily practiced with it, myself included. I just generally tend to overcompensate with my scope, and because of muscle memory, that works out fine for me, but I don't think zeroing is necessarily the best thing to even put your time into. I've always felt like PUBG's zeroing with scopes is one of their most like wasted potential of gameplay mechanics, and so if you're thinking that you need to be a good player and you need to get good at zeroing in order to do so, that is absolutely false. A lot of the best players in the game, or even just like average players, don't ever bother with zeroing just because it's not worth it. Number 13 is going to be players either parachuting too early or too late, and this is such an easy thing to screw up. I think anybody from time to time, even if you're not paying attention for half a second, you can miss the optimal time to jump out and how you should be parachuting. Basically, the rule of thumb is right now that you can jump about 1,000 meters from your target distance and just straight up glide all the way there. You don't need to like pencil down into the air to fall faster, just simply glide, and what should happen is you'll pull out your parachute and then simply float right into your target location. Now, that's much easier said than done, obviously. That's just something that you want to have happen, but what you can do is go into your training mode and really practice this technique about parachuting, and it's going to significantly improve your jumps from here on out. Number 12 is crashing compounds incorrectly. Now, if you don't know what crashing is, this is basically a term that's used when you pull up on a vehicle into a compound that's already being held by somebody else, and you're going to, with the intention of taking that over. Now, the most common mistake players make when crashing compounds is doing it really without a plan or without even windows, because what you want to have happen ideally is make a breach as quickly as possible, because they're going to hear your vehicle coming. They're going to be prepared for that, and especially if you're playing a squads game, you all have to get in as soon as possible or else you're out in the open. So crashing a compound is very different because all of them are set up in a unique way. There's windows and entrance points at different areas of the building at different times. So when it comes to crashing compounds, every situation is unique, but the golden rule that I try to live by is you need to crash the side at least with one window that you can jump in. That way you give yourself the option of staying outside if you have to, but also breaching if it's necessary. Number 11 is a pretty easy one. It's not proning when you should and then proning when you shouldn't. Some of the best examples of using proning correctly can be seen when watching competitive PUBG, especially when two teams are fighting on a ridge and then they know the elevation point. If one team lower gets hit and needs to heal, they can prone out and use that ledge to their advantage to quickly heal. Now, this obviously requires you to be aware of the terrain around you, just kind of have like a spatial awareness overall. So generally, while proning is looked at in PUBG as sort of a noob mistake, it definitely has its futility. Number 10, guys, is going to be missing loot or overlooting. These are both just as dangerous to your gameplay as one another. Now, missing loot is something that even the most experienced players are going to do from time to time, especially in high pressure situations and when there's a lot of loot to sort through and you need something very specific. It can happen. No PUBG player is ever going to have 100% loot accuracy, and you shouldn't try to. The players that do attempt to do that are the ones that spend too much time looting and then they get punished for it. It's better, if you ask me, just to take the essentials, take the items that you absolutely need and forget all the extra stuff, because if you end up needing that later, that stuff will come on its own. Number 9, guys, is going to be rotating into the next zone poorly. Now, there's pretty much two different ways that you can go about rotating, generally speaking, in all games, especially if you're playing either squads or solo. In solos, I like to just generally stay towards the middle of the zone, either holding a ridge or a compound. In squads, it's better to stay in the middle just from the beginning of the game and hold a compound for as long as you can. Now, clearly, not all PUBG games go that smoothly and according to plan. Things happen and you have to change your game plan. That's a big part of what makes PUBG fun to begin with, but when you're making these rotations, if something unexpected happens, you have to kind of like reanalyze the situation instead of just getting a little bit scared, hanging on the edge of the zone and hoping everything turns out okay, which is a very easy mistake to make. Number 8 is not going to be using your audio properly. Now, I always say to people playing PUBG that your visual input is just as important as your audio input is, and sometimes the audio is even more important as that holds clues that the visual cannot give you at the time. Everything from paying attention to footsteps, which is the obvious one, but also some not so obvious things like very specific gun sounds, even with suppressors from farther away. Marking out where those locations are is always a great thing to do. Using the sound of the engine of the airdrop plane flying over to push a building is an underrated strategy, in my opinion. It's something that I'll continue to do to this day. It's something that I've been doing for a long time, and I don't think a lot of players necessarily take advantage of this. It's a risky thing to do because if the opponent is paying attention and they know you might use that as cover, then they'll be prepared, but you can catch a lot of people off guard doing this. Number 7 is going to be vaulting or ledge grabbing inappropriately, we'll say. We'll say you do it too much or just not in the right context. Now, the thing with vaulting is that unfortunately, it does put your weapon away as you're climbing anywhere, whether it's out of a window, over a gate, or over a higher tier wall, something like that. Same thing with ledge grabbing. You have to completely put your gun down, but what you can do instead of vaulting is crouch jump the windows, especially if you know you're in a gunfight, and that's not only faster, but it's also safer. Now, this is very important. I'm not saying you should never vault, because there are certainly times where this is just way more convenient, it's way easier, and honestly, it probably doesn't matter too much whether you crouch jump or vault. So I'm not saying you should never use it, but especially if you're already engaged in a gunfight and it's going to be a dangerous situation for you, I would go for the alternative of crouch jumping a window instead of vaulting. That's what I'm saying. When it comes to ledge grabbing, so far there's not really a good alternative of getting on higher places without putting your gun down, but maybe we'll figure it out eventually. But yeah, this is something that these should be used conservatively. Number 6, guys, is going to be using the wrong grips on the wrong weapons for the incorrect jobs. Now, this can get really complicated because even among the weapons, there's a lot of interplay between what grips are good for what particular weapons. So there's not a very laid out chart objectively of what are the best grips. But in general, the thing that you got to know is that the vertical grip is overall the best one, in my opinion. This grip has absolutely no downsides and is going to simply cut down on your recoil on whatever weapon necessary. Now, the other things where it gets a little more complicated is when you have a weapon that has a ton of horizontal recoil, that's the harder kind of control. You might want to consider an angled grip, as it is going to cut down a little bit on that. And then also potentially a thumb grip, although the thing with the thumb grip is you do lose a lot of weapon stability in the process. The half grip is very bad for single tapping, and the light grip is not good for full auto spraying, and especially in longer sprays. However, the light grip for single tapping and even short AR sprays is very good. So you can see that there's a lot of interplay here. It's very complicated, and I'm not even going to get into individual weapons and those grips because that's an entirely new can of worms to open. But if you want to watch some more of my videos to understand the basics of the grips, to kind of know what you're looking for in each particular one, I would recommend you do that and just educate yourself on them, because the job that you might need is not maybe optimal for the grip that you're using. Number 5 is playing too aggressive. Now, obviously, playing aggressive is fun. You can rack yourself up a lot of kills, and it just makes for entertaining gameplay. But this, honestly, is really pointed at me because I am guilty of playing way too aggressive very, very often, especially on stream. I'll get into these bad ruts where I'm playing aggressive for 10 games in a row, and I just make stupid mistakes. I get absolutely demolished, and it's not good. When I get into one of these cycles where I'm just playing very badly and I know it's because I'm being too aggressive and trying to take stupid fights, ones that I know I can't win, then I really have to force myself to slow down and think about the plays that I'm making. When I force myself to slow down, I end up playing a lot better and I can just surprise myself and just pull off a quick win. And if this is a problem that affects you as well, again, the best thing that I can tell you is literally force yourself to consciously slow down. Like, I mean, actually slow down some of your actions. You're looting, take your time on that, take your time on positioning yourself within the map itself, listening out for other enemies, and when you do that over a couple games, you'll slowly get back into a groove that you felt when you were winning a lot, when you felt like you personally were playing good. Number 4, ladies and gentlemen, is not going to be taking full advantage of smoke grenades. Now, smokes have a lot more utility than meets the eye. For example, one of the most obvious things you can do is just play down a smoke in order to kind of put up a wall where you can cut off someone's line of vision, so you can either reposition or something like that, just to cut them off for a couple seconds, maybe so you can get a heal in. What you also want to use smokes for is, of course, reviving teammates, throwing that on top of them when they go down so they don't get shot and finished off. But what they also can do is just simply be a distraction. This trick works especially well in the late game when you're down to, I would say, maybe the top 10, top 5, and if, let's say there's an enemy holding a particular building and you need to push around it, throwing a smoke grenade in one direction, letting that go off, and then running in the opposite direction, will, even for a brief period, is going to momentarily distract them. They'll probably look towards the smoke to see if you're trying to run through it, but you can use that time to break their vision to reposition, and it's such a useful thing to do. Not only are distraction smokes the best kind of nades to use because they last the longest, but also if you really have to, they're always going to be kind of checking on that smoke to see if you happen to run through it, and if you do, you have the option of actually pushing through that smoke and it being a real one instead of a distraction. You can switch them up, kind of, keep your enemy on their toes, and it's a very, very good tech. Number 3 is going to be peeking too much. Now, it's really not obvious if you're using your lean mechanic too much until it becomes a detriment to your shot, and what I mean by that is if you're missing something because you're leaning and maybe you're not getting somebody because they're higher up, what you sacrifice when you're peeking in this game is like an inch or so of actual verticality that your shot can get. So if you're aiming up into a window frame and if you're leaning and you're hitting just the board of it, then you might want to actually just stand up because that little bit of height might be what you need in order to hit your enemy. Of course, I always recommend taking full use of your lean mechanic because not only is it a very good protection sort of thing, but it's also just kind of good muscle memory to build a habit of. But using it in general in context for gunfights is absolutely fine and is very strongly recommended, but when you feel like you're doing it too much and it's becoming a detriment to your actual shot, then that might be a sign that you need to kind of reconsider how you're playing. It's also important to note that leaning in gunfights, it used to be a very popular strategy because it made your arms kind of like the biggest hitbox and what the enemy was likely to hit, meaning it deals less damage. However, now in PUBG, the mechanics have been worked out where currently, if you get hit in the arm, it's still going to go through and hit your body, so that strategy actually doesn't work anymore. Number 2 is not going to be splitting your vehicles while either playing duos or in squads. Now, optimally, what you want to have happen when you're playing with more than one person, and if you're using vehicles, you don't want to all be in the same car, even though that might sound like a good idea. If you're playing with 4 people and you start driving, you only have one vehicle, but as you go down the road or just across the map, you stumble across more, have each player split into their own vehicle, and then still roll as a squad, obviously, but not only do you have more utility in just having 4 different vehicles, but it's also extremely safer because if you start to get gunned down from a good position in one car, either one of you is going to die, but not all of you is likely to die. If there's no vehicles available, then obviously you should probably all travel as a group, but I highly recommend splitting as much vehicles as possible between how many players. Even for duos, this is a very good strategy, just not rolling with your partner and having them take their own vehicle if available. Now, finally, guys, coming in today at the number 1 spot, one of the biggest mistakes that I think a lot of PUBG players make that is preventing them from winning or playing well is simply freezing up and getting nervous during the late game. And this is such a common thing to do, especially for players that maybe are a bit newer to this and haven't been through a lot of wins before. It's very common for someone to get into a top 5 situation and then fully freeze up and not like move from their spot, wait for the circle to begin closing and everyone else to fight it out and hopefully get the last kill. And I gotta be honest, while that does work sometimes, I don't ever think that's the best course of action. What I try to tend to do in the top 5 is, especially if I'm in position for it, is really try to take control of the rest of the game. This is going to require you to think a little bit more critically on the fly, especially with how many players are left and what they're likely to do. That's such a good strategy to go for, is consider where all the players are in position to the zone and think about what their next move is likely to be. And if you can get that sorted out, you can outplay them very, very easily. But no matter what's happening, even if you don't have the optimal setup, let's say you're fighting people with level 3 gear and you just don't have that, you still have to do your best to not freeze up and take control as much as possible. At least put up a fight before either the zone takes you or you just get kind of stuck into an easy position because the zone forces it. And that's what happens a lot of the time. It's also worth noting that it is going to get easier for you to just simply take control of the late game and be more confident in doing so the more hours you have on the game, but regardless, it's something that if you're serious about wanting to improve your game, start doing now, and honestly, you might surprise yourself about how much you end up winning more. Thank you all so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed today's video and would like to see a video regarding optimized settings, then please make sure to drop a thumbs up right now on the video. Subscribe if you are brand new to the channel, of course, and make sure before you go, click the link in the description and go follow me over on Twitch. And again, if you are at TwitchCon at the moment of me recording this video, if you see me, feel free to come up and say hi. It's going to be a good time. But anyways, guys, thank you all for watching again, and I'll see you all on the next stream or the next video. Take it easy, and peace out.